Hi, my name is Christian Castellanos, and today I'm giving a presentation on large-scale study of file system content, published in 1999 by John R. Douceur and William J. Bolosky of the Microsoft Research Corporation. A brief history and to detail the previous work. In 1981, there was a study that analyzed 36,000 different files, which ultimately led to the notional phrase functional files functional lifetime, which is essentially the time lapse between the creation date and also the last modification date of a file. Next, in 1984 and 1991, two more research studies were published, both really contributing toward the support of the previous 1981 study. Though in 1991 study there was slight fluctuations, but ultimately supporting evidence. 1994, there were two more research studies conducted. One studied Unix file systems, 48 file systems in particular, where the second one looked at what had been at the time the largest published study of static file systems known to date at that time in 1994. Ultimately, these five notional research studies led to and also helped to support the increased file size and count of files per user over time. This 1999 research study from Microsoft also provides great details in support of such. Methodology of this study, the researchers extracted 10.5 terabytes of data from over 4,800 Windows computers, and which also relates to 4,418 computer users, which is differentiated amongst a variety of different job roles, which we'll see here in a second. Reading from the study itself, the intention was to analyze the data using histograms, collective, cumulative distribution functions, and analytical approximations. What the researchers did was devise a program that traverses the directory tree of each file system in each of the Windows computers. And that's how they got the data. What's shown below are the functions, mathematical functions, analytical approximations, as coined in the research paper, which drove the distribution function graphs, which here is one of several graphs that were published in the paper. One other additional point to the most important components of this study were to acknowledge the file sizes, age, file systems, and user job functions particular to the data set. And this slide shows the tabular data. The one most importantly on the right is the breakdown of the job categories by the file system types, along with the count of each. In regards to the key terms, collective cumulative distribution functions are one of the most important terms. This is defined as a summary of multiple frequency distributions in a single graph. Next, functional lifetime, which was described earlier. This is the difference between a file's age and the time since its last access. Compositional granularity, this is defined as the size of records that compose the file. File directory size and directory depth. This is more commonly known as a file. Of course, how we understand it today. And directory size is the organization of where the file exists in the directory. Directory depth, this is the level at which a file can exist at. Think of folders embedded in one another. Lastly, MDCC, otherwise known as the maximum displacement of the cumulative curves. This is defined as the greatest absolute vertical separation between the cumulative measured frequency curve and the cumulative analytical frequency curve. This is based upon the very first definition, collective cumulative distribution functions, which is largely what all the graphs are based upon. Functional output, what's important here are the distribution graphs that are published in the paper. Foremost, file sizes fit a log normal distribution. Most files are small, but most bytes are on large files. That's the greatest takeaway point. Next, file ages and lifetimes fit hyperexponential distributions. What's important here is that there is a little difference in file age distribution among different user job categories. Similarly, with directory sizes, which fit inverse polynomial distributions, There is very little difference in the directory size and distribution among different user job categories. Lastly, directory depth fit Poisson distributions. The researchers found that 15% of all directories are at depths of 8 levels or greater, which contrasts a previous study that published 5 depths on average, 5 levels of depth on average. Lastly, I'd like to read a quote as stated by the researchers regarding the no rules to the approximations visual. We do not claim to have found governing distributions for our observations. These are just approximations. This is specific to the empirical data derived from the computer systems. These are not hard set boundaries or rules that they are claiming to that they are acknowledging. Key concepts. File size values suggest that most bytes are found in files composed of record size in powers of 2. Again, most files are small, but most bytes are in large files. These next 3 points are sort of interrelational, but mostly speaking to job function being independent of directory sizes and also lifetimes varying between files and also directory sizes. Lastly, job category has little effect on file and directory sizes, but it has a dramatic effect on file lifetimes. The last point there in regards to file extension names, which are strongly correlated with the size and compositional granularity, but more on that here in a second. This is the aggregate tabular data of the top 30 most popular file extensions, along with the statistical distribution data per file extension type. In regards to the resulting contributions, the highest level directory size and structure are similar to previous results published in 1994, but again, the depths are greater in this study. The median file age is 3 times of that reported in 1975. In contrast, file systems are about half as full on average, which contradicts an earlier study published in 1991. In regards to summarization of this study, file sizes continue the growth trend observed over the last couple of decades, which was also acknowledged prior to this study. Only this study again acknowledges Windows operating systems and the file systems within it. File ages and types vary according to the user job function, as stated previously. Lastly, file name extension is a predictor of file size. That was one of the more prominent notions that came of this study. Altogether, though, adaptive strategies may be helpful in tuning filing systems and file types to individuals' work habits, i.e. job functions. Impact and relevance. I want to acknowledge that file systems are still vastly in use till today, as they were as far back as 1981, though, largely probably, have increased in efficiency and have bettered themselves. It's largely the same files and file types and the overall structure. But in today's world, it's largely influxed with streaming data, right? Cloud infrastructures and also mobile devices. So it would be interesting to see this study conducted in 2023. Lastly, the interdependency of current workforce and data management. Today's day and age, more workers are dwell in data. That gap is not as broad as it was generations before. How does this fit into data science? Well, data begins with the file types, organization, and the volume, which leads us to our next point, the notion of the 5 V's, of course, which we covered in lecture. Also, TICA, the ability for that software to detect, parse, sort, ultimately the availability of usage for its users. The structure and the practice of storing such files in file systems relate to its growth over time, variety over time, and also the availability of said files and file type extensions over time. In regards to the pros and cons, this paper did a great job in establishing relationships between the file systems, directories, and users. Also did a great job at coherently explaining the methodology used, though at times could be quite dense, but ultimately catered to the overall notion of that previous trend before of increasing files and size, separate from job function. It's one of the most important points of the paper. Lastly, it's timeless and relatable to all users. File systems are still heavily in use today. Um, Cons, need of a succinct hypothesis. Again, I regard this as a research study, but it would have been interesting to see a clearly defined statement and the efforts of this study to either prove or disprove something. But again, a very small con. Lastly, overwhelming list of findings is very mathematically intensive, but again, was coherent and just took some rereading and patience to understand, but was overall a great paper. Thank you.